Evening, everybody. Great to see you all here once again. We're hoping to be able to continue these talks, certainly on a weekly basis over the next month or so. And, the feedback's been really positive. So we'll see if we can do something throughout the year. Not weekly, but maybe monthly. Tonight, as you know, I'm going to be talking about the return of the red kite. It's always a popular subject. Next week, we have Andy Lester talking about gulls. And there's a small competition going on between Andy and myself, simply about how many people attend. So I've got 87 at the moment. But the key thing is the number that are still there at the end. And if there are more staying at the end of his talk than at the end of my talk, then I'll probably have to buy him a drink. So please don't push me in that position. Stay with the talk and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So the red kite is a really special bird. It's one that was common in Hampshire and indeed in England, Scotland and Wales for many, many years during the 1800s and long before that. But they became basically extinct within our county and within England and Scotland, just a few hanging on in Wales. And the story tonight really is about how we managed to bring them back and what's happening with them now. So to move on, the red kite is a really stunning looking bird. If you look at the way it flies, it's so much more interesting than, say, a buzzard, which just normally sits around on fence posts. Kites are always doing something. They're wheeling around the sky. They're very agile. They're able to turn very quickly. And they've got that really superb forked tail, which becomes more and more forked as they become adult. And there is a superb shot of a red kite. Incidentally, not every photograph tonight is taken by me. Some of them are, quite a lot of them are, but I've borrowed some from friends in order to make up this talk. So it's able to turn very quickly. It's a really agile bird. And one of the things it does very well is it steals food off other birds. So it has to be able to fly quickly and indeed faster than them, and also turn quickly to be able to grab things and then escape without getting caught. So it's an agile bird. It's not got a particularly strong beak. It is a hook beak, of course, like all birds of prey, but it's not really designed for tearing into things. It's designed for taking small pieces of something which has already died, and probably the carcass has been ripped open by a buzzard or a raven, which has a much stronger beak. So red kites are really scavengers. They're like vultures are in Africa. They come along and they clear up the mess after there's been something happened. So a few facts about the red kite. The wingspan is 1.5 meters. The weight varies between 1 and 1.5 kilos. The female is very slightly bigger than the male. We have the breeding age, which is after they're 2 years old. So once they've been born, they have a couple of years basically having a solo life or mixing around with other young solo red kites before they actually settle down and breed. When they do nest, it's going to be in March and April that they create the nest, and a clutch of between 1 and 3 eggs normally. Very rarely do we get 4. Incubation of just over a month, and after that about another month and a half or so before they leave the nest. And the birds that do survive after their first year or two of life, well, they could live up to 25 years. That's the oldest known bird, and that's based on ringing results, which means actually there could be older birds out there than that. So here's a typical red kite nest. In a tree like this, which might be an oak or a beech, it'll be in the fork. It'll be a nest that's actually been used by another bird originally. They never make their own nest. What they do is they take the nest of maybe a crow, particularly sparrowhawk actually, they like taking over from, and they'll build up that nest a little bit more. They'll use it year after year. But if they have a bad year where, say, the chicks die in the nest or something else happens that's not good, they'll very often leave that nest and go to a new place. But they are site faithful. So if you find a nest, chances are they're going to be there for the next 2 or 3 years at least. So there you have a bird at the nest. It's mainly the female that's at the nest. The male doesn't really turn up at the nest very often other than to bring food. And during the time when the female's actually on the eggs or with the chicks, he's usually sitting nearby, probably only 20 feet away or so, just keeping guard. The typical feeding style of the red kite then is to come down and grab something and probably not even land on the ground at all, just literally grab it and fly straight off. And they will follow us because they quite often find that we disturb things when we are walking around. We might disturb a small mouse or something, or we might disturb an insect, and they'll come along and grab it. This is actually in a pub car park in the Chilterns, in their garden, where they've put out scraps of meat, and quite a lot of people in the Chilterns have done that. And I know there was a question about that later. It's generally not advisable to put food out for kites, because what it does is creates an artificially high number of birds. And if you ever then stop providing that food, then they start to struggle because they haven't got enough food. So we don't really encourage people to feed kites, but here they do occasionally in pubs and things. They're quite agile, a bit like an osprey. They're able to dive, not actually into the water, but just grab, a bit like a fish eagle does in Africa, grabbing a piece of food that's been thrown into the water. They will grab dead fish as well, which in fact I think is what's happening in this particular case. They'll take the food, they'll then fly away from wherever they've got it, because they steal food off other birds. And so if there are any other kites around, they'll steal the food off that kite. So the first thing it's going to do is get out of the way, hide somewhere, and digest the food. But perhaps a more typical situation in the wild is where you've got maybe a farmer going around the fields in July or August, harvesting the silage. And with that, of course, there's going to be deaths of insects, there's going to be deaths of small rodents, and the kites are flying around the fields looking for those casualties and picking them up. And you can have easily 20 kites in a field like this. And I think there've been records of something like 50 kites over one field in Hampshire. So look out for that. If you see the tractor, there's a good chance in the late summer that the tractor will be followed by kites. But not as many as this. This is Gigrin Farm in Wales. Some of you may have been there. You can find it on the internet. It's Gigrin, Gigrin Farm. It's near Rhyadr, and you can go there, pay a small fee, and have an opportunity to photograph kites. They feed them every day, and the birds come down in huge numbers. I mean, really ridiculously high numbers, something like a couple of hundred red kites coming in from something like 15 or 20 miles just for this special feeding session. What an amazing sight. We don't have anything quite like that in Hampshire, but we certainly do get big numbers. I currently hold the record for the number of red kites seen in one go, which is 133 at a roost not too far from Andover. When they're in that situation, they're interacting with other birds a lot. They have a lot of hassle with crows, not so much with buzzards. It's mainly with corvids that they fall out, quite often because they've stolen food off the corvid, or they're trying to get food off the corvid. You'll see this bird, this kite's got a number 43 on it. That's from the tagging program we undertook for a number of years, and I'll tell you more about that later on. We don't do that anymore, but we did do it, and it gave us a lot of information about 10 years ago. So kites and crows, they don't get on. And they don't sometimes get on with farmers either. Now, this is a dead rabbit, but if you could imagine that was a dead lamb, and in the morning, the farmer, first thing he sees is a dead lamb with a kite standing over it. Well, it's easy to understand how the farmer could conclude that the kite had killed the lamb. The likely situation is, though, that the lamb either died naturally or was killed by other birds, such as ravens, which are much more aggressive. And the kite has just come along to have a bit of a feed, and then ends up getting blamed, particularly because it's got a hooked beak. And it's, very true that people many people don't like birds with hooked beaks. And if they have a gun, there's a chance they might try and dispatch the kite, and indeed any other bird of prey, as we've seen in the news so much recently. And that's what happened. A lot of kites were killed. And back in the 1800s, the church actually gave a reward for every person who was able to come along and shoot a kite and bring along the body, because they were stealing chickens and things like that, and getting a bad name for themselves. They do like eating squirrels. I have a friend who's a gamekeeper who kills squirrels as part of his job. If you like squirrels a lot, I suggest you just turn off your computer briefly and come back on again straight after this. Basically, he kills the squirrels and then he throws them up in the air by the tail when they're dead, I might add, and the kites actually catch them in midair. But they will eat a lot of dead animals, and you'll find they pick them up off the road. Kites themselves also end up being victims of roadkill, because they themselves get killed because they leave it too late before jumping off the road, having tried to eat a dead squirrel or something. So anyway, they can carry mammals. And here's a story from getting on for, what, 8 years ago now. Red Kite tried to snatch my dog. Now, this was in the Maidenhead advertiser, but it also made it onto national TV and onto national radio. And I ended up doing a number of interviews with this lady. She's the one on the left, by the way. And this is her toy dog. And she said that the Red Kite tried to snatch her dog. Well, there's no way that a red kite will be able to carry a dog of that size, even though that's quite a small dog. That would be way too heavy. In fact, that would be heavier than the kite. So what happens is that when dogs are, sniffing around under bushes and things, and maybe they found an interesting smell, they're following up a scent, the kite will think, that dog's got onto a bit of food, I'm going to come along and steal it. And of course, the kite will be looking to steal the food from the dog, not steal the dog. But anyway, it didn't stop a media storm which lasted about a week. And I ended up touring TV stations and radio stations defending red kites. I actually ran a poll on Facebook at the time to try and find out if people wanted to see more toy dogs or more red kites. And the good news is red kites absolutely won outright. I think it was something like 9-1 in favor of red kites. But some people don't like them. That's the sad situation. And here's an example where a police officer, a wildlife crime officer, is holding a dead red kite. And here is the X-ray of that kite on the right-hand side. And you can see the shotgun pellets in the X-ray of that bird. So unfortunately, almost every week, there's a story in the press about a red kite being shot somewhere. If we go back to the late 1800s, this is a map showing the distribution that had been the case for red kites before that. So every single county that's got an E in it, by that time in 1875, the red kites have become extinct. So if you look at that map, the only area where red kites continue to be was in the north of Scotland, where they were occasional, not common, and also in Wales. And in fact, both those areas, they were at best rare. And as you can see, they were in Hampshire. Indeed, the last pair to nest in Hampshire at that time was in 1864. And they nested in Broughton in the Test Valley, but sadly their young, I think probably their eggs were taken, so they didn't succeed. So that's what happened back then. And, there's a long history of red kites being with us. This is out of the Canterbury Tales, the Knight's Tale, which is one of the stories by Geoffrey Chaucer from about 1400. I won't attempt to read the sentence on the left, but you can see he refers to a kite. And we now know that that was red kites. Red kites were in London, they were in the city. They used to feed on all the refuse in the streets when things were so dirty and not well kept. And also when people, murderers, were hung from bridges, the kites would come down and actually feed on the bodies of the people who were hung. So they had plenty to eat. And if you look in old bird books, like this one that's in my collection from the late 1800s, you can see that red kites were well illustrated. They were a well-known bird to bird watchers. So they were not black kites. That's a bird found only in mainland Europe. That, incidentally, is a hand-colored engraving by Alexander Leyden, who was, I think, 18 years old at the time when he did it. So very impressive bit of artwork. And if you look at maps, you'll find that there's plenty of evidence of kites having been around. So Kite's Nest Farm, top left there, is at Tidpit. Kite Lands, which is not far from Nicheldever, and then other places away from Hampshire, Kites Hall Farm, Kite Green, and Kites Hardwick being just other examples of that. And the bottom right one, Puttock End. Well, Puttock is an old name for a kite, so you see quite a few places called Puttock. And if we go back to the 1970s, when to see a red kite, you had to go to mid Wales, and many of us did do that in those days. We used to go to places near to Rhyadr looking for them. You can see the distribution in the UK was just restricted to Wales. That's where they were hanging on. But they were present in much of Europe. Not a common bird, I have to say, but you can see that the orange areas, they were resident, they stayed there the whole year. The green areas, they were just a winter visitor, and the red areas, they were a migrant coming up a little bit from the south for the summer. So the distribution was not particularly wide. That's the entire distribution throughout the whole of the world. The RSPB had a good idea. They thought, well, we need to protect the land where the red kites are, and Gwenfryd is one of the RSPB reserves in Wales, and back at that time it was a very important reserve because there were something like 30 or 40 pairs of red kites, and they were all really centered around that part of Wales, and the RSPB bought that land to protect the red kites. And it's a beautiful area of wooded valley with the woodland hanging to the hillsides. Not actually not actually great habitat for red kites, it turns out. What we now know is that their reproduction level in those woods was very poor, because actually very cold and wet at certain times. But that is where the red kites were living. And, you know, as I say, there were 30 or 40 pairs. Interestingly, they were all related to each other. In fact, they were all descended from one particular female who was many, many years old, probably in her 20s. And, you know, you had males basically nesting with their mothers. You had females nesting with their fathers. And it was not a great situation for the gene pool. I did actually talk to a bird watching friend in Wales about this, who didn't seem to think that was particularly unusual. But anyway, it's not good for the gene pool. So the RSPB came up with a really good idea with the government after a lot of discussions, and they looked around the country and they looked at all the various habitats, and they suddenly realized that actually, you know, although it's not quite as steep, this woodland and these hills and this open grassland in the Chilterns in Buckinghamshire was actually quite a good habitat and might be good for red kites. And the decision was made in 1989 to bring some red kites over. And if you look at this map, this is showing all the locations where red kites were released in this special program. And what they did is they would go to a nest in Spain. If there were 2 or 3 chicks, they'd take one of them, and then they would go to another nest and they'd take one of those as well. And they were brought over these chicks. They were then reared in captivity without any human contact. And then when they were the right age, they were released so they could then be wild. So you can see right the way through the country, releases were done most recently in Cumbria in 2010. Of course, there was the existing population in Wales, which was getting bigger anyway through all the work the RSPB had been doing. The only area really they didn't reach, they didn't go to the Highlands particularly, and there's a big gap really down in Devon and Cornwall, where it's really quite a scarce bird and hardly ever seen. So here's a red kite that is ready for release. It's been brought from Spain. It has been allowed to mingle with other kites, so it knows it's definitely a kite, and it's not had any interaction with humans. I mean, food has been given to it, but not actually kind of anybody hand feeding it. They've just been given food in the nest, a fake nest, which they were able to feed. They were given wing tags, which enabled us to work out individual kites. So they each had their own tag, a different color or a different letter. And that really enabled us over the next few years to understand how they'd survived and also who they were living with. And eventually these kites were released. And this is an example of the one in the north of England around Gateshead, where they lived in this great big box, effectively, in their special place, and then they were let out. And what was done is food was put there for them so that if they hadn't actually managed to find any food themselves, they could come back and be fed. But, you know, they were very successful. And indeed, they hung around together. They started roosting together as well. So if we just go back and look at some maps, here is the BTO Atlas from 1968 to 1972. And you can see that the red kite distribution is really narrow indeed. After a few years with the RSPB doing some protection, but before they started releasing them, the numbers did actually start going up, and you can see that it's increased almost 3 times through the protection the RSPB gave them. A lot of people were stealing their eggs, and you know, it was quite a challenge for the RSPB with a small team on the ground in Wales, but they did very well indeed. And then there was the release. So after the release, this is the most recent atlas, and you can see all the areas in red are areas where red kites are now present and breeding. The areas with the little black dots are areas where back at the time of the atlas, which is now, you know, nearly 10 years ago, they weren't actually breeding. Now in some of those areas they are breeding now, but it's still, as you can see, there are still plenty of areas where they're not present. And I took this off the BTO bird track system this week, and this is the current situation with recent records of red kites. So you can see where they are. There's a very dense population through the Chilterns and central southern England. We're very much part of that population now. They've spread a little bit into Kent. They're still not down in Devon and Cornwall, and there are patches further north where they haven't actually gone to. So I know one person's asked the question, will they be in the New Forest? Will they breed there? I think it's unlikely because they like areas with open land and they like having sheep there, but we can discuss that later. And when the original release was done, it was done just south of the M40. So you may know when you go through the M40 heading up towards Oxfordshire, there's a particular place near Stokenchurch where you go through quite a gorge and you come out the other side and you can see a great big open plain to the west. And that is the area where these birds were released. They were released on the very, very private estate owned by the Getty family. No public footpaths there and plenty of security. That red dot is where they were released. And they spread out like somebody tipping over a cup of tea in all directions over the next few years. That was the situation when I started working on red kites about 10 years ago. And of course, they've spread much more since then. This is the situation in a bit more detail when we did the atlas. So you can see back at that time, they were still just moving down south through Hampshire. And indeed, there's the Hampshire Atlas, which hopefully you've all got. And that shows you the distribution. So the green areas are areas where red kites were found during the breeding season. And the dots indicate how many there were. Now, in some cases, there weren't very many. In fact, less than one on average. And therefore, there was no dot put there. But as you can see, up in the top northwest corner of Hampshire, a lot of birds. That's where the majority of the birds were. And they were moving down from the Chilterns, moving down from places like Reading, where effectively they've become a garden bird. And actually there were too many of them, so they've spread out. And here's the situation with the number of records of red kites. So over on the left-hand side, we've got 1992, which is when we started putting our data on a computer. There were a few records before that, but hardly any. And you can see it was many, many years before really we got very many kites at all. And this is even after they'd started being released in the Chilterns. But then suddenly, 2007, everything changed. I'm not quite sure what it was, but suddenly birds started flooding in from further north. They were building up in the Reading area, and there were just too many of them. And that's actually the point at which I started studying them. I was out one day, quite by chance, I found 8 red kites in one place. And I realized it was the largest number ever seen at that time. It was in 2006. And I remember calling John Clark, who was the county recorder at the time. And he came out the week after and he saw 16. So I thought, right, well, I'll come back. And I got over 20. He went back and he got over 30. So in the end, we had up to 60 that winter in the early part of 2007. Numbers then dropped off. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that numbers really dropped off. I think actually what happened is people got a bit bored with kites and probably thought, oh, yeah, well, I've seen them before. I mean, let's face it, when you're driving along and you see a red kite, do you write down details and send it to me as county recorder? No. Do I write them down? No. They are all over the place now. So we don't actually keep the details in the way we used to back at that early stage. But back in 2007, everybody saw their first red kite in Hampshire and wrote it down and sent it in, hence the big increase. So the numbers now, well, we get over 2,000 records a year now. And some of those records are just of one bird, some are of 20 or 30 or 40. So it depends where you are. Tracking red kites is something we did back in those early days. We fitted transmitters to the birds so we could track them using a radio receiver like this and listening a bit like you hear the sort of beep, beep, beep sound. All very basic technology, but really great to do. And many thanks to Hoss at that time, who helped to finance some of that work. We'd look for nests, and in the winter, finding a red kite nest is not that difficult. They're very obvious. They look like that. The other thing about them, you notice that they dress their nest with all kinds of rubbish, bits of paper, bits of linen. They like collecting things. They steal things off washing lines. Hate to use the word knickers, but they Steel knickers, they don't go for men's underwear. They pick the items which are lightweight in weight they can take back to the nest. Tea towels and things like that, tights, stockings, and so on. So here we have a red kite nest. The female is already on the nest. It's before the leaves are even on the trees, so you can see her there. Here is the nest, lined with lamb's wool or sheep's wool anyway. And very often, as I said, there are other bits and pieces. So here's a nest with 3 eggs with bits of scrunched up paper, all kinds of bits of rubbish you can find. And here's the washing line. And all I'm going to say is it's the item in the middle that's probably going to get stolen by the kite. So if you have kites coming to your garden, be aware you need to tie your washing down. And here we have a bit of a close-up view of a red kite nest, and you can see even in that one, bottom right part of the nest is a bit of scrunched up paper that the bird has brought in. So here's the female. It'll be the female because the male just doesn't really play any role in bringing up the chicks other than bringing food. Female at the nest with her chicks and very tenderly feeding the chick. So you've got this little tiny chick that's going to grow quite quickly. We don't do this now, but we did used to do quite a lot of tree climbing to go and investigate the nests. And here's a colleague of mine climbing up to a nest. Now you can actually tell that's a red kite nest because you can actually see a pair of tights hanging down from the nest itself. Always you'll find something like a bit of rag. That's how you can tell them. And he's there climbing the tree. He's being faced with a couple of red kite chicks sitting in an absolutely disgusting nest, which really will stink. It's got dead rabbits, any kind of roadkill that they can pick up, they'll drag back to the nest. And we've seen amazing things. We've seen great spotted woodpeckers and all kinds of stuff. They don't kill them, they just find them on the road. We used to take the chicks and we would actually fit them with a transmitter. And here is a bird being processed. You can see the little backpack on the bird. Now, we've all seen this on many documentaries now, but back then it was all quite cutting edge technology. The bird would wear basically like a pair of braces with this backpack attached, not too heavy, with a little transmitter wire. It's very important that this should not weigh more than 4% of the bird's weight, so it wouldn't be a problem for them. And indeed, it didn't ever appear to be because they were able to fly off easily with them. And they're very docile actually in the hand. Red kites are not aggressive. If you have a baby buzzard in your hand, it spends most of its time trying to claw your eyes out. Whereas a kite is completely different. It's very quiet and very, very calm. And particularly when they're little tiny ones like this, this is one that's a bit too small. We weren't able to do anything with that one. And hugely cute as well. A really lovely bird to look at that stage in its life. And here are a couple of red kites. This is the male on the left and female on the right. These are chicks that are about 4 weeks old. The one on the left is probably a bit more like 3 weeks old. Like many birds of prey, the eggs are laid every few days, and the female will actually incubate them from the moment they're laid, which means that the ones that are laid first will hatch first, and the ones that are laid last will hatch last. And this one on the left, this male, will have been probably the last one to be laid and therefore the last one to hatch. And very often in a situation like that, that bird won't make it. It'll be not strong enough to take food away from the other 2 chicks, and it won't survive. And we actually didn't think this bird was looking too healthy, but we did put wing tags on it even so. And I know they don't look very nice at that point, but you know, they're really, really light. It's a tiny, tiny weight to put on the birds. So we thought that bird on the left, we probably wouldn't see it again. I predicted it wouldn't survive, but it did. And 6 months later, there it is, flying around. It's now a subadult. It's growing its feathers well. And by seeing that, I was able to realize that that bird had made it. And that was only 1 mile from where it was born. So we did all that tagging. It was very helpful for us to find out where they came from and where they went to. It was part of a national project. And here, if you look, the left-hand column is the colors that were used on the left-hand wing. So on the left-hand wing, the color would indicate, for example, yellow for the Chilterns, which we were part of that project. And on the right, the color would indicate the year when the bird was tagged. So you'd have a yellow tag on the left, and you might, for example, have a blue tag on the right. Quite a good system. And by also putting the trackers on, it meant I was able to stand on tall hills tracking where kites were going. And quite often I was standing outside places like Basingstoke, standing on the top of a hill like Beacon Hill, and people would come up to me and say, what are you doing? And nobody really understood when I talked about red kites. So I used to say I was trying to get Sky Sports seemed to go down easier without too much explanation. Anyway, that's where they were going. So they were moving around. The red dot shows where they came from, and then you can see they were going and roosting different places. This is just the first 6 months of life. And you can see they've gone all the way down, that bird had gone all the way down to Sussex and then came all the way back. And it did find other kites down in Sussex. So they really do get together. They travel a lot. And one of the things you may have noticed is that in the spring, we get red kites appearing in places where they don't breed. So, you'll have kites over the middle of Southampton, you'll have kites over Portsmouth. These are young birds that actually are looking around, trying to discover their local surroundings before they settle down to breed for the first time. And you may also see, if you're lucky, a few red kites sitting in the trees. So here we have half a dozen or so red kites. This is a roost of red kites late in the day. Now, when there aren't many of them, back in the sort of 2010 or thereabouts, when they were just still arriving, they'd get together in the evening in the winter. And these were all young kites, just a year old or 6 months even. And it's almost like a kind of youth club for kites. They get together, they meet other kites. You don't really get adults in those roosts unless it's an adult that for some reason has lost its partner. So it's very much a kind of pickup joint, I suppose, for meeting other kites. It also probably has advantages because they're roosting together, so safety and numbers. And it may well help also that if you roost with kites and you maybe haven't been very successful in finding food, then the next morning when they all fly away, you can join up with a few others. And if they're more successful and more experienced than you, then maybe you'll benefit from that. And the kite numbers are big in those roosts. As I said, I got 133 in one roost. We don't have so many roosts now, and the reason for that's going to be that there are so many kites around, and indeed there are probably a couple of thousand kites now in Hampshire, that they don't need to roost in order to find other kites. They can just be anywhere, and within a couple of minutes they've seen another kite and they can hook up with them. So they don't need to go together specially. But there are still a few roosts. There are probably 5 or 6, and they each have maybe 30 or 40 birds in. Just up in the northeast of Hampshire, we did a Christmas count last year. We had about 230 kites across 3 or 4 different roosts. So gives you an idea of the numbers. And here's a young kite on the left and an adult kite on the right. And it's one of the things I'm often asked is, how do you tell them apart? Well, they're really quite different. And you can probably see straight away there that that bird on the left has got a very pale breast, and the one on the right, which is the adult, has got a really rich color on the breast. But here's a slightly easier comparison. So the young bird on the left, and I think the thing I'd point out here, 2 things. On the underside of the young bird's wing, there is a little faint white line that is made up by the edges of some of those feathers. And if you look on the adult, that doesn't exist there. So young kites do have this little pale line on the underside of the wing, but much more obvious than that is this really pale breast and belly. And if you look at the color of the wing is very, very contrasting against the breast. So it like is dark, light, and dark. Whereas if you look at an adult red kite on the right, it's kind of dark, dark, and dark. And you can see there is a really rich red, beautifully red chest on that kite. They also have a grayer head, and the tail you can see is much more forked, whereas the young bird's tail's still got quite a long way to go. So you should be able to tell adult kites from young kites when you're looking in the future. Now, kites are a part of our everyday life now. It used to be a thing where you'd tell everybody you knew because you'd seen a red kite, and now you probably don't tell anybody. But there are places where it's still good news, and indeed here we are up in the north of England. They've got kite walks in the countryside, and the local buses are dressed up to look like the red kite. They're celebrating the fact that the birds are doing so well around there. When you go shopping, you end up finding kites in the local shopping centre on big displays. And in Scotland, they love them as well because they've been introduced there. And here is a village where the local children have designed the village sign, and they've put kites on there. That's better painting of a red kite than I could ever do, I think. And adults in Scotland celebrate kites through ale. So the Black Isle Red Kite Ale, very nice indeed. I've had that. We don't have that here, but we do have a couple of pubs called the Kite and the Red Kite. And I think it's part of our heritage that's come back to be with us, having been away for, well, been away for 150 years or so, or it's only over 100 years. If you want more information about red kites, this is a book that has just been published in the last year. It's by Ian Carter, who was part of the team to bring in the red kites originally, and illustrated by Dan Powell, who many of you will know. He's a HOS member and a brilliant artist. And that just came out last year. It's a good book to read, beautifully illustrated too. I was helped in my early work by HOS and also Natural England, who paid for all the transmitters, and several HOS members who helped to finance some of it as well. So that is the end of my talk, and I would be very happy, Barry, if you'd like to ask me any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Keith. Thanks on behalf of everyone in the usual way. That's been incredibly informative, as all the talks have been. A couple of questions have come through, Keith, while you've been going through a talk. I know you've answered a number of the questions that were posed in advance. Question here is, I presume kites have strong stomachs. I'll try and read this. I heard last week of a Harris hawk who ate lead shot in a rabbit and was poisoned. Would this be the opposite case for a kite? You know, I guess can a kite survive lead shot?
I know a kite would not survive lead shot, and indeed the same is true of things like peregrines. So any bird that eats, for example, a pigeon that's got lead shot in it, will become ill. Whether it dies or not is another matter, but I know I had a peregrine at one of my nests I was studying, and that had eaten some lead shot and had to go to the Hawk Conservancy for treatment. So yeah, that'll be a major cause of death amongst young kites.
Okay. Another one about the interaction with buzzards. Do kites threaten buzzards, or vice versa? How does that one play out, Keith?
Well, it's interesting. So in the time that red kites have become really quite common, also buzzards have become really quite common, because we have, plenty of both. There's a lot of food out there. You've probably been reading in the newspapers about the challenges that have been made recently towards people who release game birds. There are an awful lot of partridges, red-legged partridges and pheasants out there. And when they go and shoot them, they very often don't get collected up. So there's quite a lot of food there for kites and buzzards. You do see them occasionally having a bit of a tussle, but I've watched it. It's playful tussle. It's not really very serious. Barry, you and I were out. We went for a walk yesterday. We saw a red kite and a buzzard in the same bit of sky. They just ignored each other. The one thing I would say, though, is that although kites don't actually kill things very often, they will kill a baby pheasant or a baby lapwing, but they're mainly picking up dead stuff. What they will do, though, is they'll steal food off buzzards, and buzzards do kill. So if a buzzard was to kill a bird and then was flying back to the nest to give that to its chicks, and the kite comes along and steals it to give to its chicks, then the buzzard's got to go and kill again. So there is an impact on bird populations, but I think buzzards and kites are going to live alongside each other. They did before, and they will again.
What about kites and other raptors, Keith?
Well, again, you see interactions with things like peregrines, but it's all fun. I mean, peregrines just get on with things. They're operating at a much higher altitude. They're up 500 feet or so looking for a pigeon. They're not competing with each other. They might just have a little bit of so they will have an interaction if a peregrine has a kite come close to the nest. And we had a case this last summer at Winchester Cathedral where a kite got knocked out of the sky because it had gone a little bit too close to the peregrine nest, and the peregrine gave it a hell of a belt, and it went to the ground. It did survive. There are cases of buzzards getting killed by peregrines, but I don't think there's much interaction other than near the nest site.
Okay. What about the movements of kites? Do you anticipate them moving more into towns as the numbers increase, and obviously the increased competition out in the more rural areas?
Yeah. So the experience in Berkshire is that in the middle of Reading, they're nesting in parks. when they started nesting in Hampshire, they only seemed to nest on big estates owned by people with titles. The first pair that I was looking at was the Duke of Wellington's land, and then there was Sir Richard Pelly and Sir David Coleman, Sir Michael Coleman, and basically they were going on land owned by very wealthy people. Once they become common, there's no way they can be like that. They just have to go wherever they can go, and they very often will go in town parks. Will they do it in Hampshire? I think they will in one or two places. I mean, I could imagine them doing that, for example, in places like Fleet, Andover, maybe places like Whitchurch up in the north. It's going to be a while before they come down and do that in Southampton, because they've still got lots of those nice private woods to fill up first before they are stuck for places to nest.
Okay. Often a topic of concern is when any animal is reintroduced around what the impact it has on the broader ecosystem. Your view on what impact the reintroduction ultimately of the kite into our area more broadly has had on the ecosystem?
Well, first of all, it is a reintroduction. Let's get that clear. This is not a bird we're bringing in that's never been here before. It's a bird that we got rid of. So I think it's absolutely right that we've brought it back. I don't know whether they're more common than they were 200 years ago. It'd be nice to go back 200 years to see what was around in those days. Are they having an impact on other things? Well, they clearly, along with buzzards, are having an impact on nesting ground birds like lapwings. Definitely, I watch things like lapwings and stone curlews, and you can see the kites above, and you can think, poor old stone curlew is going to be lucky if they can get their chicks away. But I don't think, from what I know of kites, they're not that smart when it comes to finding chicks. They can find dead things, and they can find bigger chicks, like bigger pheasant chicks that are rather obvious. But if you've got a stone curlew chick, it's so well hidden, I can't even find it. So a kite at 100 feet isn't going to find it. If you're a lapwing and you allow your chicks to walk around on green grass and just sit there not really taking care of them, a kite could come in and steal. So yeah, they will have an impact on some of those birds, but I stay with the fact that this is a native bird, and I think it's right that it should be here.
What about a competition? What about which is the fastest, the kite or the buzzard? Which is the fastest flying, Keith?
Definitely the kite. The kite has got the longer wings. It's got, it's not as heavy, so it's a lighter bird with more wing strength, and they are very agile. You see them when they want to move; they really move fast. Buzzards are lumbering things. You see a buzzard take off, and you actually wonder if it's going to make it across the field. They look as though they're about to fall out of the sky sometimes.
Keith, one you did cover in the first half, but a number of people did, or a few people did join sort of halfway through. That's about question about why do we get so many kites in fields? I know you kind of covered that, particularly in the summer months when the farmers are kind of turning. We just want to kind of cover that one again quickly in terms of why so many kites gather in fields.
Yeah, by the way, I'm going to put my video on because I don't think you can see me, can you?
No, we can't.
That's probably good, isn't it, really? But now I can't work out how to do it. Why do we get kites in fields? Well, they feed on the ground. They find stuff on the ground. They find insects that have been crushed by tractors. And they're looking for dead things. That's what they do. They'll eat worms. That's one of the things they do look for.
Okay, super. Keith, that's all the questions. I'll just pause as I always do, just to give a opportunity for any more questions to flow through. I know you've answered quite a number, but
I think you asked a question about strength. Do they have strong stomachs?
Yes.
I think any bird that eats dead stuff is going to have, and indeed any animal that eats dead stuff is obviously designed to be able to eat dead stuff. And if we did it, it wouldn't work terribly well. Maybe a couple of thousand, well, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, we could have eaten dead stuff and got away with it, but it doesn't work now.
All right, I'll say pause for a final time. We've got a little bit of time if anyone has got any final questions. It looks as though you've covered everything, Keith.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, and yet another thank you. A number of those have come through as we've gone towards the end. So I'm going to say, yep, on behalf of everyone, Keith, thanks again. Fascinating talk, as ever, well presented, and thank you yet again. Obviously, you've set the bar for Andy to try and follow next week. Obviously, the gauntlet's been laid.
I think there's a lot of good TV next week, actually, so I think I'm going to win.
So, but yeah, to be fair, so next week's is on gull identification. So I know it's been heavily subscribed, but if anyone is still interested, there is an opportunity to at least put your name forward for next week's talk, same time. I know as Keith and I have been discussing and planning for some further talks beyond next week, and certainly our intention is to carry on running these weekly talks. We'll just take a rain check. Well, not rain check. We'll just check over the next week whether we do one or more before Christmas. But we probably will at least seek to do at least one more before the Christmas break, maybe two, and then certainly carry on into January. Oh, no, there is another one. Oh, okay. Yeah. Someone loves kites almost as much as peregrines. I know that's another favorite bird of yours as well, Keith. So anyway, I shall say good night and good evening to everyone in my usual way. Stay safe. Look forward to seeing some of you again next week, hopefully. And if not next week on a future talk, we'll, as ever, if there's other topics which we've not covered so far, please do let us know. Keith and I continue to look at topics and speakers to align to those as we continue to roll this program out over the coming weeks and into the new year. So it'll be posted, as I say, back on the HOS website, hopefully tonight for tomorrow, if anyone wants to see it again or share with another member. And otherwise, I wish you all a great evening. And Keith, once again, thanks, many thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Ben.
Good night, everyone.